The year is 2007. Inspired by a single picture, posted on an image board, a group of enthusiasts located all over the world assembles with one goal in mind: crafting a game like no other. Eventually, they call themselves 4LS, and despite all odds, deliver an experience that challenges you on many levels. Let me take you on a journey. We begin surrounded by sleeping sakuras. The game opens with our protagonist, Hisao, going to a park, prompted by a mysterious note. Someone at school slipped it into his course book. As it turns out, that someone is Hisao's love interest, Iwanako. The snow is peacefully falling, a breeze follows, and Iwanako asks Hisao to go on a date. What follows is not a wholesome, cheerful moment of bliss, but a collapse, both figurative and literal. Our character discovers that he's got a heart condition. Months go by. While at the hospital, Hisao shuts off everyone. Iwanako eventually stops visiting as the last person. And then Hisao is sent to Yamaku Academy, a school that caters to the unique needs of people with disabilities. He is not taking any of this well. Upon entering, Hisao is confronted with a different reality. He quickly finds his homeroom teacher, which is where the game presents us, the players, with the first choice. Should Hisao introduce himself to the class or farm this job out to the teacher? Upon the initial meeting of his new classmates, Hisao is, for the first time, truly confronted with the uniqueness of his surroundings. He'll be learning alongside people with missing limbs and various impairments to their senses. He meets Shizune, the class representative who's deaf-mute, as well as Misha, who interprets for Shizune and almost never leaves her side. This is when the learning curve starts to ramp up for Hisao, as he now has to figure out how to behave among people so different from, yet so similar to, him. It's the tail end of the year 2000. During the 59th Omake comic book market in Tokyo, many amateur and professional artists are selling their goods. Doujinshi are amateur publications, often, but not limited to, manga. Amateurs may find success and recognition through them, while professionals can have a creative outlet outside of the major publishing system. An artist known as RAITA publishes his book, titled Shuppenharnische, is an erotic derivative work building on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind by Hayao Miyazaki. One of the themes is the body and its wounds. It shows the main character injured, still recovering. Not gonna lie, that whole lolly stuff is kinda creepy to me, but let us move on. The Japanese word Omake means extra, as in extra content. The last 3 of the 80-page book are Omake. One of them shows a group of 5 schoolgirls that, keeping somewhat with the overall theme, suffer from various disabilities. This is the concept for a video game titled Katawa Shoujo, with a comment, "If there was a Renai game like this, RAITA would totally be all over it." Renai simply means romantic. The comic market comes to a close, and Shuppenharnische takes its place in the homes of its new owners. The book lays asleep. The year is 2006, December the 16th, a day like any other on 4chan's B board. B stands for other. B means anything goes, and I do mean anything. Needless to say, B has a reputation, one that tends to color the discussion quite a lot when talking about 4chan in general. At 14:20, one of many Anons posts, this time claiming to be a nurse, tending to a newly arrived patient, a half-Caucasian, half-Asian girl who had lost her legs, an arm, and one eye in a car accident. Predictable jokes ensue. B upholds its reputation. As the thread continues, the tone starts to change towards being somewhat more wholesome. This marks the beginning of what would become known as the Saga of Nurse-Kun. People start showing compassion. making fan art, they start to cheer. For both Nurse-Kun and Amputan, as she is called. As this tale unfolds, it's being captured and archived by a user named Sarafan, who's a sysops for a site known as Wikichan. It's there where the saga receives its alternate title, one that is perhaps better recognizable: Damaged Goods.
However, after a server crash, all of the fanart was lost, and the story was almost lost forever. Thankfully, she managed to save the entirety of the wiki pages beforehand, until his website was itself shut down.
Before Wikichan goes down forever in yet another database failure, the data is preserved by the aforementioned Sarafan. The archive is almost lost forever in 2012 when Mega Upload dies. Biblioteca Anonyma manages to download the archive a mere 2 days before the famous file-sharing site goes down. The README compares this unearthing to the discovery of King Tut's tomb. I'm not sure if Tutankhamun would endorse anal jokes, but there you have it.
With the discovery of a complete archive, we can fill in the blanks as to exactly who and what Nurse-Kun was replying to. These had previously been omitted due to Wikichan's mad rush to winnow out the story from the trolling. And from there, we have created the remastered edition, restoring the story to its original glory.
I really wish there was magic in the world. I would do anything for there to be magic that could make everything alright again. Someone felt the need to preserve this bizarre part of internet history, which perhaps was never true to begin with.
On December the 14th, 2007, she received an anonymous tip from a professional statistician who was convinced Nurse-Kun's story was fake. Use the database yourself and see if you can determine Nurse-Kun's home state. Anyway, if the story was true, there would be news reports about it somewhere, given that local news will report on every fatal car wreck. And indeed it was. Comment by J-Stone. I believe I have found out the location of Nurse-Kun and Amputan. I am 90% sure that they are located somewhere around Washington, D.C.
The story may be fake, and indeed, 4chan's Anons were quick to cast a lot of doubt on Nurse-Kun's stories, but it did strike a chord with people. So much so that more disability-themed media started cropping up on 4chan, and we don't have to look far to notice RAITA's Omake page. It's right there, in the first thread, the one that started the entire saga. On 4th of January 2007, the anime board, known simply as A, reaches critical mass when one of the Anons posts a colorized and translated version of RAITA's concept page. Here we can finally read it in English and learn more about the heroines. They don't have names, but basic personality traits are drafted alongside some minor details like the rooftop lunch. From there, people start sharing ideas and opinions.
So, what is the plot? Or at least the general idea you guys are thinking of? So, has an artist been decided yet? Or is everyone going to pitch in? I can see this project taking off during the summer season when school/college is out. Here's the second, third, whatever, the request of a great story. Quality art would be a big help too, of course.
The thread becomes a sticky, a rare move on part of 4chan's moderators. The excitement can be easily felt.
It's sticky time. Yes, Dad, yes. OMG, it actually got sticky. This is the most worthy sticky I've ever seen in A. Good decision, mods.
From that point onward, the thread garners even more attention. The very idea of making a visual novel where the heroines have disabilities is one of the main points discussed.
So, is this game supposed to be about a bunch of handicapped girls? Am I the only one not to see the appeal? Sounds like some parody from NHK. Am I the only one not to see the appeal? Indeed, you are. Finally, a doujin game disabled people can relate to. Disabled fetish? No! Disabled people don't deserve love. I'm currently involved with a disabled girl. She only has use of one arm. And she's the sweetest thing ever. Godspeed on your endeavor.
Since the only really concrete piece at the time is the concept page, a lot is open to interpretation. The traits and behaviors of the heroines are discussed.
LOL. Let's stay in reality, folks. This game needs real deep character development. The player needs to listen to the characters and listen to their dreams and wishes in life, even for Death Town. I nominate Burns-chan for Resident Tsundere. My own sketch, by the way. Are you stupid? Burnt-faced Tan isn't Tsundere. She's shy, reclusive, and so moe that I'm gonna die. If there's a Tsundere, it's sign language Tan. She communicates with her hands and her fists.
Tsundere and moe are manga/anime tropes. As you can see, the fact that the game is to be developed by Westerners does not escape the Anonymity.
God, I hope they don't put Japanese honorifics on the end of all the names. I'm already going to feel pretty weird playing a game set in Japan with Japanese characters made by Americans/Europeans. If everyone is a woman-chan or a loli-san, it's going to push me over the edge. There's some argument I've read about whether or not this game should take place in a Japanese setting. I say it should be, because the Japanese education system uses special schools to aggregate all students with disabilities, making it easy for the 5 girls to all be in the same school.
One theme specifically crops up as early as within this legendary sticky, one that will haunt us for a long time.
What's the made by A feel you're trying to capture? A pile of incoherent shit that, thank heavens, incorporates every little stupid-ass idea that someone posted here, because God forbid anyone ever be granted the authority to exercise any kind of quality control over the thing. Anonymity is all very well, but guess what? If you're serious about contributing to a major undertaking like this, then that might mean accepting just a teeny tiny bit of the responsibility that all the anti-registration whiners are so loath to even consider. Now, all of you, get the fuck out.
During the lunch scene, we're given our second choice, what to ask the girls about. Deciding to ask about Shizune's disability does not further the conversation. Hisao instead stays silent since he doesn't want to touch a sensitive topic. The scene ends with the trio eating in silence. If you were to shove a knife through someone else's body repeatedly, that would constitute murder. In many jurisdictions, this means a life sentence, perhaps capital punishment. In fiction, however, this is a-okay. There's even an entire genre of film dedicated to such brutal kills, the slasher genre. When it comes to sexuality, the opposite is true. You bang your partner, you bang him hard, and that's 100% legal. Your neighbor even gives that nod of approval, or maybe even high-fives you. In fiction, however, this activity is called pornographic, and can't be shown as is without age-gating. Why do we feel more comfortable with blowing up heads rather than blowing heads? I don't have the answer, but what is obvious to me is that sexuality is a huge taboo, despite it being everywhere. Another taboo are disabilities. People who are affected by disabilities seemingly don't exist. Still, way too many buildings are not suited for wheelchairs, and way too many websites aren't made with accessibility in mind. Ask yourself, when was the last time I saw a disabled person as a character in anything? And no, Daredevil does not count. He's blind, but his magic bullshit echolocation makes him see better than the exemplary eagle eye. Having all of that in mind, especially shocking is the mixing of the two taboos. Picturing someone with a missing limb in a piece of fiction is hard enough. A character having a romantic relationship with them is another leap. But then, actually showing this, and in video game form, simply does not compute. It makes a lot of sense then that when we step in Hisao's shoes, we have to learn a lot along with him. About him, and perhaps about us. All or almost all of us are a fish out of water in this scenario. The game does a great job at showing Yamaku as a familiar place with unfamiliar features and people. We quickly meet Misha and Shizune. And to answer Hisao's question, according to the Ability Center for Independent Living, which is a charitable organization in New Mexico, USA, when conversing with a deaf or hard of hearing person, with an interpreter, you have to keep eye contact with that individual, not the interpreter. So, how do you behave respectfully and not cringy around people with disabilities? Hisao keeps asking himself such questions. I've worked with a person who was missing a part of their arm, and I was hyper-conscious about not saying any phrases that would contain the word hand. This is not some imaginary problem that only Hisao has. If merely being in the same room can be too tall of an order, what about romancing? Even if that initial thread, the issue of tone and tastefulness did not fly completely over the heads of the Anonymity.
The decision to remove the prostheses or leave them on for sex could have consequences in the relationship with her. What kind of statement does it make about one's feelings if you want her with or without the fake legs? Is wanting to feel her skirt stumps somehow more accepting or intimate? Or is it simply a question of practicality? The running legs in the OP don't look too comfortable for lying with.
Throughout the development of the game, the team is well aware of the minefield it's treading on. It's time to highlight some of their thoughts with the space and exposure they deserve. It's an interesting theme, especially when combined with the premise of the game, the school for the disabled children. To me, a school like Yamaku is an ethically unsolved problem. It's neat to have the kids to be in the school, but sometimes it feels like some kind of internment camp. We've argued over and over again whether some of our characters, Hanako, Hisao, etc., should be at a school like ours, but should a school like that exist in the first place, fictionally or in real life? This is my problem. To what extent Rin experiences the loss of her limbs that never were there? It's very hard to express the absence of something. Generally speaking, I think that KS is not trying to make a statement about disability. Sure, the angle we chose is that disability does not define a person, and we think a lot about how we portray disability, but there's no moral in KS, apart from a subjective one a reader might find. KS is exactly what it is, nothing more. It is the world that should be more open-minded and accepting. And now a phrase that crops up quite a few times on the development blog and beyond it. I have to tip my hat to how confronting it is, how much it catches you off guard. Cripple porn, I really like that phrase, raises eyebrows even amongst people accustomed to the trends and oddities of modern Japanese or Japan-derived media. I think almost everyone on the planet is aware of Japan's reputation as some kind of a horn of plenty of weird and creepy things. Similarly, a lot of people on the internet are aware of 4chan's reputation of some kind of a horn of plenty of depravity and mindless comedy. So when people from 4chan make a Japanese-style porn game about disabled people, the ingredients for a catastrophe seem to have been thrown in one pot. The portrayal of disabled people and their sexuality is a tough nut to crack. Some people say that the mere fact that KS focuses on disabled people, spotlighting them as others, can be interpreted as fetishistic and disabled people as subject to ridicule. Sure, there might have been ways to deal with the disability theme better and lift it into central role through something else than a cripple school, twist threads of sharpest social critique inside the text and all that jazz. But you know, we are really making a romance game here. A story about a guy and a few girls and their emotions and happiness and sadness during one summer of their life. For a long time now, I thought it doesn't matter one bit whether they are disabled or not. There were debates about just how much attention we should pay to him taking pills, their side effects. You would not believe how many nightmare scenes we threw out, and so on. Hisao was no longer a penis attached to the psyche of the player. He was a character. And not only that, he was a different character in each path that shared commonalities at his base level. It's not just something that the devs are struggling with. For example, according to the Irish Family Planning Association, in their Disability and Sexuality Briefing Report, they enumerate a list of myths. On page 6, among others, we read, harmful myths and stereotypes. All disabled people have the same needs. All disabled people are asexual or hypersexual. Physically disabled people are unable to have sex. The situation is already messy and challenging, and it only gets more convoluted from here. As we'll soon discover, Katawa Shoujo is a fascinating example of a work that's stuck in a permanent war with its own genre. The official website describes the game as a bishoujo-style visual novel set in the fictional Yamaku High School for disabled children, located somewhere in modern Japan. Hisao is able to find friends, and perhaps love, if he plays his cards right. There are 5 main paths corresponding to the 5 main female characters, each path following the storyline pertaining to that character. The story is told through the perspective of the main character using a first-person narrative. The game uses a traditional text and sprite-based visual novel model with an ADV text box. Katawa Shoujo contains adult material. It is the product of an international team of amateur developers. There's much to unpack here, and I'm still new to VNs, so I don't recognize all the tropes and conventions, but I'll try my best. And by that I mean, to the TV tropes mobile! Bishoujo is Japanese for pretty girl. In normal Japanese conversation, the word can apply to any girl from toddlerhood to late teens. In the anime and manga fandoms, however, the word is anime fanspeak for attractive girls and young women, particularly those intended to appeal to a male audience. The site Manga Planet has this clarification. Bishoujo is more of a character design rather than a genre. So Bishoujo is a design choice, a thematic and visual convention. The game features heroines mostly fitting this description. Big eyes with detailed highlights, detailed hair in lots of individual tendrils, fluttery costume elements, example ribbons, swirling skirts, tendency toward light or pastel colors, flowers, and sparkles. Another part of the description is the visual novel. On the surface, describing a work like that seems easy. It's a game dominated by narrative, where you sometimes make choices. Text is delivered through a box at the bottom, and characters are implemented as sprites that change depending on the situation. All of this is supplemented by background music and sometimes sound effects, but this definition is grossly oversimplified. While the term a visual novel originates in Japan, it is actually used far more often in the Western gaming community than it is used in Japan itself, with the two regions having different understandings of the genre. Many titles that are thought of as visual novels in the West are classified as adventure games in Japan, with the abbreviations ADV or AVG often being used. Many popular titles that Western fans would call visual novels, such as Clannad or Steins Gate, are, in fact, advertised as just another type of adventure game in Japan. So we're dealing with a definition that's not agreed upon universally. They elaborate further. Even Japanese titles that would be considered traditional adventure games are often classified by Western fans as visual novels. These include titles released before the term was invented, such as the Protopia serial murder case, and modern games like Ace Attorney, even though the franchise's creator has said that Ace Attorney is completely different from a novel game. Both Giant Bomb and MangaFandom.com make this distinction. In Japanese terminology, a distinction is often made between visual novels proper, abbreviated NVL, which are predominantly narrative and have few or no interactive elements, and so-called adventure games, abbreviated AVG or ADV, which typically incorporate problem-solving and other gameplay elements. This distinction is normally lost in the West, since both are streamlined compared to Western adventure games. Japanese ADVs generally focus on narrative and dialogue, with little exploration and few or no logic puzzles or inventory items, and thus both NVLs and ADVs are commonly referred to as visual novels by Western fans. Visual novels and ADVs are especially prevalent in Japan, where they made up nearly 70% of the PC game titles released in 2006. So the terminology is a bit of a mess, but at least we have a fuller understanding of what the ADV box is. To close this laundry list of definitions and concepts, yet another one has to be mentioned: eroge. Eroge means simply erotic game, that is, a game that contains any kind of sexually explicit material. Eroge is a visual novel that contains sex scenes, also known as H scenes. The word eroge are made of ero plus gay or erotic game. These visual novels do have a plot often. If you remove the H scenes, you get an all-ages visual novel. Sometimes visual novel makers releases the all-age version for those who just want to enjoy the story. These versions tend to have the sexual jokes removed as well. And just to clarify, the H in H scenes stands for hentai. If you don't know what hentai is, you've been using the internet wrong and need to be re-educated. KS has a NSFW toggle. Legend has it, this thing disables the sex scenes. Or as Amanda A.G. Lange from Tap Repeatedly mentions, the game also has adult content. There's a filter to turn this off. But, I'll confess, I don't know what it does, because I'm an adult. I might add, if you're playing exclusively for this, do yourself a favor and find something else. Knowing all that, we can return to our developers who, as we now know, were never trying to hide their mostly Western origins. Maybe you've known someone who, when young, got fascinated or maybe even obsessed with manga and anime, so they decided to draw awful manga-inspired comics and paste that junk on the sites like DeviantArt. Perhaps you were that person. Members of one culture getting fascinated with another and producing bizarre works of fiction is nothing new. This brings us to a first in a long string of misconceptions. That the game's super weeb and trope-tastic, because it was made in the West by weebs who snorted one manga too many. Such preconceptions quickly fall apart when actually playing the game. There are no blatant cases of, as one of the Anonymous put it, woman-chan or loli-san. The only exception seems to be Misha, but this comes across as some idiosyncrasy of hers. No other character does that. I'm starting to suspect this may be in relation to some structure that I don't know or recognize, either in the game's own universe or in the general anime VN meta. The developers elaborate on the genre once again. We ended up with an approach that tries to avoid the two common mistakes that games of this genre usually fall victim to. Using the awful plot as a thinly veiled excuse to shove masses of H scenes into the viewer's face, or slapping unrelated porn on top of an otherwise perfectly good game. The reason? The hentai in Katawa Shoujo is not going to be critical, original content, save maybe for some quirks related to the uniqueness of each of the heroines. Some of the characteristics of a typical visual novel, forcing the reader to assume the role of one of the characters, the endless amount of words used for nothing interesting, painful replays, and their consequences, or causes, annoy me to no end. Now that I am writing one myself, I realize that many of the things I don't like about reading visual novels are nigh impossible to avoid when making one, or perhaps, more accurately, hard to avoid in the archetype we picked for Katawa Shoujo. And, speaking of archetypes, here's an important one, moe. Coined in Japan the late 90s, moe, derived from a Japanese word that means budding to sprout bloom, is an ill-defined otaku term that means, amongst other things, cute, huggable, or endearing. The classical moe character, based on that of conservative Japanese customs, is highly associated with innocence, shyness, humility, submission, helplessness, and wooby characteristics. Example, prone to tears, shrinking violet, extreme doormat, cute, clumsy girl, the ingenue, the healing type genre, etc., usually drawn with terem eyes. So, if I'm getting this all correctly, a moe character would be all, "Oh no, I can't tie my own shoelaces. Please help player stand-in Kun. Protect me from my own ineptitude. And if the game is also an eroge, then fuck me with that unrealistically largely drawn dick of yours." This will help us understand the struggles of the developers when writing characters that live in a specific genre. KS girls are moe not because they are awesome at school, running, bureaucracy, or bench pressing. They are moe, if they are, because they are weak and they suck. However, overdo this and we get Toradora. We are not pros. We don't even have a well-defined target audience, so KS and its characters are quite a bit more freeform. Constructing good characters is still the most important thing though, and this returns me to the first point. How much it matters if a character is a bad eroge character, even if she would be decent character otherwise, and who decides that? KS is called a bunch of times a dating sim. But is this correct? I've never played a dating sim in my life. So I'll again lean in heavily on the experience of others. Hopefully, they'll know what the hell they're doing. The dating sim is a type of game designed to set up goals, usually in the form of schedules and stats corresponding to social skills, which must be achieved to discover a story focused entirely around the character development of the player's chosen girl or guy, get into his/her pants, or both. If the game plays out like a gamebook, that's a visual novel. If it feels like you're playing an RPG, trying to keep track of everyone's feelings about you and giving out presents, that's a dating sim. Even Minesweeper tracks more stats than KS, and that's one of the simplest games out there. You can't, for example, learn what's Lily's favorite type of tea and then go down to the shop, make a gift out of it, and earn some brownie points with the girl. Oh, and speaking of Lily. Calling the game a dating sim is therefore incorrect, because there are no dating mechanics. The only way to have a relationship is by following the story and making the right choices. Discussing the game and its tropes, subverted or not, is difficult without spoiling a lot of the stories. And, since I'm firmly anti-spoiler, let's revisit the beginning. Hisao is in the park because he got a note from Iwanako. Instead of confronting him on the corridor and asking the guy out, she did the more moe thing, slipped a note with the help from a friend. The narrative points this out by lampshading. Lampshading is a purposeful act of drawing attention to a cliché in order to acknowledge that said construct is overused. This shows that both the creators as well as characters understand that something may be tropey. Everything goes according to the cliché until it abruptly crashes and Hisao is sent on a different trajectory and we along with him. We can see this in universe as a character getting screwed up badly by fate, or we can see this out of universe as the moment where the narrative just gets pushed somewhere else. The moment when 4LS makes a statement. This is a Bishoujo game, sure, but it's our take on the thing. There won't be any romancing with cute Iwanako. Even though she does visit Hisao in the hospital, we, the players, see her only there and then, but never do we see her face. That's the face of a reality that will never come to be, a much more cliched one, in the snow, among sakura trees, in a lovely park. The concept, when explained in the shortest possible manner, a cripple dating game, sounds like something no sane man should have anything to do with, but hopefully the treatment we are giving to RAITA's idea is a satisfying experience. At the very least, I hope you have as much fun reading it as we had making it. From now on, we'll be working to finish the full version that contains the path stories. And no sane man should be covering this story. That's where I come in. On 29th of April 2009, a pivotal moment in the history of the project happens. After about 2 years of development, the demo, aka Act 1 Preview, drops for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Audiences are given a sizable chunk of the experience and can easily share their opinions. One of them is Lee Alexander in her 2010 article on gaming website Kotaku. She describes the origins of the game. The publication generates quite the response from Kotaku readers. As we enter the comment section of Kotaku, please put on your hard hats and other protective gear. There's gonna be idiocy flying in your general direction. This is your first and only warning. Idiocy inbound. We begin with something tame. Why in the world are we having a conversation on being attracted to disabled people? What the fuck? Yes, it's not like they can still be attractive. Goddamn disabled people. It's a game. It covers something games have never covered before. That's it. Read the article. Neuro Yagami. You're being too nice. Agito 13. Read the fucking article. After a great start, aren't we? The third pic even shows the girl with bilateral lower extremity amputation below the knee standing on a rooftop of a building covered with gravel. Did they even think twice in terms of the difficulty ambulating on those uneven surfaces? I haven't played this game and I have no intentions in doing so, but it seems like the game is completely lacking a sense of reality for the game to bring any sort of empathy, if that's what the developers were aiming for. These guys are just making a fool out of themselves for putting so little thought into this game. This is more than shitty. This is weaponized diarrhea levels of shitting, completely unfounded. People like this will never be satisfied by any kind of simulation, approximation, or abstraction. There are games that try to reproduce an existing or historical reality as good as possible, but this is not feasible. SimCity is one of the greatest, most influential games ever made, but it doesn't try to perfectly simulate every single iota of everything ever. And there are two reasons for this. One, no dev team in the world has the resources to collect all possible information on a given subject matter. You can hire consultants, but how deep are you willing to go into the minutiae? And second, games don't have to be realistic. This person is claiming to be a medical professional. I would not want to be treated by someone who gets uber butthurt and goes on a tirade because there's some fictional gravel on some fictional rooftop. It's worth noting that this individual later apologizes for their shit flip. So, why am I even bringing this up? Because 4LS did their research and had a consultant on board. The editor, Silent Cook, is a medical professional. They even went into dumb details like popsicle wrappers. We have to understand, however, that performing due diligence and gathering reference material to correctly design something is one thing. Being mindlessly beholden to the collected material is a different thing. If you want something that's 100% accurate, just live your life. But even if you disregard the above, a third thing rings true. Emmy, the character with the prosthetics, is not supposed to be there. Rooftop lunches are a bit of a community secret, because the students just broke the lock. Unruly students? Now that's 100% accurate. Moving on. Gen Robot. But turning disabilities into a fetish is not the point of this game at all. While technically somebody could play it for that reason, the game itself is a story about human relationships and coming to grip with what can't be changed. Give the demo a try, you'll see what I mean. I don't know what to think really. I think the idea is based on shaky ground, the reduction of someone to their disability, but a lot of people seem to be saying very positive things about it. I won't be playing myself though, so I can't have an informed opinion. I'm a straight woman and don't believe that the game has much to offer me. Jumping to conclusions seems to be a damn popular sport on the internet, doesn't it? Moreover, if I were an English teacher, I'd be handing out failing scores left, right and middle, because many of these people didn't read the article or did read but without any comprehension. Oh lordy lord, fucking Christ! What's Katawa Shoujo doing on Kotaku? Opening minds. A lot of people in real life that have these types of disabilities are sometimes treated like they are invisible. I worked at a hospital and I know a patient that had terrible burns over her body. She said one of the worst parts about having to look at herself was that it felt like no one else acknowledged she was there, not even to ask how she felt. And we do have some more trolling, this time more hilarious. Herp the derp, there's the door. Instant awesome. I'm turning 360 degrees and walking away. Herp the derp, you're still facing the argument, you know that, right? Try doing a 180 next time. Even 90 or greater would have done the trick. Thankfully, there's a selection of comments that are much more level-headed and respectful. Which is more wrong? Including these kinds of people in games such as these, or hiding their existence via their absence in media? Are they untouchables worthy only of pity, or can we allow ourselves to love them? Katawa Shoujo is surprisingly enthralling. Despite being created by the internet hate machine, it's deep, almost poetic at points. The characters are honestly intriguing, and the story is beautifully written. Dismissing this game solely due to the fact that it was made by 4chaners is ignorant. This is a piece of art. It is the first push in the industry to make this content acceptable. These characters aren't cripples in the player's eyes, they're people. After playing the demo, I can say with the utmost assurance that I will never look at a disabled individual as I previously have again. That alone is the sign of an excellent game. Thinks before he posts. I don't know anyone that has a disability the likes of which the game covers. From what I know of the world, we look for a mate who has a damn good physique, sharp as a tack, good humor, and seriously start wavering when we bump into someone who does have a major disability. And honestly, that seems off to me. Does anyone think of this in this shade at all, or am I too optimistic? The demo seems to make it a point to treat the characters as people with unique personalities which are informed by, but not defined by, their disabilities. As long as it stays that way, I don't see a problem. We also get an account from someone who has experiences similar to those mentioned in the article. So, yeah, as a gamer who was born with one hand, the topic of how disabilities are represented in games, as well as other media, is something that interests me. Usually the portrayal of characters in games that do cope with some kind of disability are shallow and predictable in the manner they deal with their problems. It'd be funny in some cases if I didn't have to deal with the reality of my own limitations. I honestly wasn't expecting something so coherent and mature. It was refreshing to see characters that were so natural. Rarely did any of the dialogue feel forced or out of place. Rather than having their characters labeled and defined by their disability, these were individuals, and as a result, were much easier to empathize with. Man, I really love this game. I'm not really a fan of Eroge, but I thoroughly enjoyed playing this game. You truly care about these characters after a while. Watching them how they deal with their disabilities is also very interesting. My husband was talking about the companions and romance options in the new Mass Effect. Then I realized it would lead to disabled sex. This made me laugh, not because disabled sex is funny, but because that would be more progressive in a helpful way than alien side boob. I played it some 7-ish months ago, mostly to laugh at how awful it had to be. Ended up respecting it quite a bit. It's a very weird fantasy, but it's worth exploring. I intend to play the full thing when it eventually realizes itself. But anyone looking to condemn it should at least play the first act. This is actually pretty interesting. Disabled characters exist in almost all other forms of geek media, think of Darth Vader and Professor X, but you don't see many of them in video games. Certainly not Eroge. I can say, without a doubt, it is probably the best free game I have ever played. The article is definitely correct. The material was handled tastefully, and the characters were amazing, going past their limitations to become more than they seemed. By the end of the game, I ceased to view them as disabled and more as people. To call it fetishized is completely incorrect. Very good article, Lee. I don't really know how I feel about this. It's hard enough coping with something like this in real life, dating someone or being someone with a disability. I can't speak for everyone, but the fetishizing of a disability seems just as backwards as it could be considered progressive. I'm currently casually dating a girl with a light form of cerebral palsy, and the last thing she wants is special treatment. If anything, it totally pisses her off. I believe empathy and sympathy are completely different, and I have to catch myself all the time. I think this is more offensive than good, but it's still nice to know that if you're disabled, there can still be people interested in you. Just hopefully for you, not as a fetish as this seems to encourage. More, oh look, 4chan made a game, publicity, complete with repeated references to B. Oh, 4LS, will you ever be free of your past? How many of us would love to meet a bunch of people in a random space, realize a common interest, and build it into something we can be proud of? I'd wager more of us would like that than another Saturday. Yeah? If it doesn't show too much in the presented sample, then you should know that there was a lot more idiocy and ignorance. There are so many misconceptions, in fact, that it makes more sense to group them and be done with the entire batch. The first and biggest by far is the whole 4chan made a game. If you've been following along, then you know that the developers took whatever they could and went elsewhere. Similar to this, there's the false assumption that 4chan equals B and that B equals 4chan. Just like one person can color the discussion about the group, a group can color the discussion about the entire image board. And finally, which is related, assuming that A is the same thing as B, or that either of them made the game. The boards are separate constructs and are frequented by different audiences. This was one of the big ones, and to the credit of some of the commenters, they were trying to set the record straight whenever possible. Yet another error, which can be attributed to people being morons who skim articles instead of actually reading them, is accusing the game of being exploitative and distasteful. You've seen the gameplay. Did the main character get a hard-on after seeing amputees? Or after learning about Shizune's deafness? Yet a bunch of people, deciding to be willfully ignorant, never gave the game a chance. Another theme was making the logic jump from attraction to fetishization. Apparently, you can't be attracted to someone who happens to be missing a limb without having a fetish or maybe even some exploitative ulterior motive. And let's not forget that gem from the beginning, which, thankfully, got a steaming hot serving of backlash. One topic kept cropping up time and time again, not only on Kotaku, but in general. So much so that it needs to be addressed. And as it so happens, it ties into the deeper understanding of Katawa Shoujo and games like it. Bruh, is it even a game? Let's get back to our little conversation. What difference did that choice make? This time we decide that Hisao has all the info he needs, so he won't ask for assistance. Both girls seem really content with this response. The rest of the lunch passes in silence. One book that deserves special recognition today is Espen Aarseth's seminal work, Cybertext, Perspectives on Ergodic Literature. Allow me to introduce you to the author, who I have dubbed the Archduke of Bitch Slaps. Why? Following her logic of interface dependency, a game of computer chess would be classified as dramatic if the user could position the pieces directly with a mouse or a joystick, and as epic if the user has to type commands such as C2, C4. Needless to say, I like him already. The way he can take a previous theory and say, nope, that's bullshit, is admirable, refreshing perhaps. The initial chapters of the book are spent on preparing the ground, dispelling myths, and proposing definitions. During the cybertextual process, the user will have effectuated a semiotic sequence, and this selective movement is a work of physical construction that the various concepts of reading do not account for. This phenomenon I call ergodic, using a term appropriated from physics that derives from the Greek words ergon and hodos, meaning work and path. In ergodic literature, non-trivial effort is required to allow the reader to traverse the text. Seeking a path within a labyrinth of options. This should sound familiar. As we'll soon discover, those ideas can help us understand much better what makes our cute anime girls tick. Aarseth defines cybertext as a perspective on all forms of textuality. Cybertext must contain some kind of information feedback loop. The different ways in which the reader is invited to complete a text and the text's various self-manipulating devices are what the concept of cybertext is all about. Aarseth also makes this statement: we approach the wider spaces, the current final frontiers of textuality. As you can see, Misha is on the final frontiers of textuality, where no cute anime girl has ventured before. What do you think about it, Misha? Thank you, Misha. Your input is highly valued. One important thing that we need to establish immediately is the relationship between cybertext and technology. The cyber surely means technologically advanced, right? As it turns out, no. Today we tend to think high-tech whenever we hear cyber, as in Cyberpunk the tabletop or Cyberpunk 2077, the ill-fated video game. Let me introduce you to the I Ching, the Chinese Book of Changes, which dates back to the Western Zhou dynasty, 1122 to 770 BC. The way the I Ching works is you approach it with a question, and you want it to tell you your fortune. By using 3 coins, you produce what is known as a hexagram. You can perform a transformation into a different hexagram. You then combine the text describing both hexagrams to perform a reading. The maximum number of combinations is 4096. If this number looks familiar, that's because it is familiar. As you can see, 64 times 64 is 4096. The I Ching was an inspiration for Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who developed binary math. It's not a huge secret that binary is older than computers. But there you have it, yet another example. Speaking of examples, I Ching is not the only case of a non-computerized cybertext. Another one is 100,000 Billion Poems by Raymond Queneau. He composed 10 sonnets, each 14 lines long, and each with the same rhyming sounds. Then he printed each page of the book as 14 separate strips. Thus, you can flip your way to any combination of lines. The booklet gives you 10 to the power of 14 combinations, which is 100,000 billion. The variety and ingenuity of devices used in these texts demonstrate that paper can hold its own against the computer as a technology of ergodic texts. So, from now on, when you hear the term cyber, maybe you'll first see an image of the I Ching or Queneau's textual machine, rather than Miss Mantis Blade's panty shot. Without this intro, you'd be prone to thinking that cybertext hinges completely on digital technology. I hope those examples show that this is simply not the case, especially since the book that birthed the discipline, Norbert Weiner's Cybernetics, discusses both animals and machines. Inferring from what Aarseth stated, you don't need a computer to produce a cybertext, but it really helps. As you can see, the paper medium may house something more traditional, a text, like Huckleberry Finn or The Lord of the Rings, but you can use paper also to create textual machines, as shown by I Ching and Queneau's sonnet machine. Between text and cybertext, there's a middle ground. You probably already heard this term, and that'll be hypertext. Hypertext was originally proposed in 1964-65 by Ted Nelson. It consists of a bunch of nodes connected together by links. If it sounds like I'm describing the World Wide Web, then bingo. Although one could argue that because modern websites have various forms of computation, both client and server side, most sites are cybertextual rather than hypertextual. The irony is that while you can read a text in the traditional format however you want, you can gloss over boring parts or skip to wherever, including the ending. A hypertext takes away such freedoms. In order to reach a specific node, you have to follow the links that were pre-configured by someone else. The super modern hypertext is therefore more limiting than the traditional books of yesteryear. Coming back to cybertext, the two components that make up a cybertext are called textons and scriptons. A texton is a unit of text, a fragment, a snippet, it just exists. When going through a cybertext, you encounter not textons but scriptons. A scripton is what happens when you arrange textons in a specific way. Queneau's work has only 140 textons. Those are the basic building blocks. But those blocks generate the eponymous 100,000 billion poems. Those poems are scriptons. In our example, the game has a predefined set of textons, and basing on player choices, they get arranged in a bunch of scriptons. This is especially strong in Act 1, where depending on your choices, you won't even see some opportunities close, while others open in their place. You lock yourself into reading a specific scripton, like my initial story of Hisao going out with Shizune. Me trying to go onto Emi's path but failing and getting tied up with tasks by benevolent dictator Shizune is another example of me failing to solve an Aporia, which is near and dear to the nature of a cybertext. The cybertext reader is a player, a gambler. Trying to know a cybertext is an investment of personal improvisation that can result in either intimacy or failure. The tension at work in a cybertext, while not incompatible with those of narrative desire, are also something more, a struggle not merely for interpretative insight, but also for narrative control. I want this text to tell my story, the story that could not be without me. In some cases this is literally true, in other cases, perhaps most, the sense of individual outcome is illusory, but nevertheless, the aspect of coercion and manipulation is real. This is something that I have felt, and I know I'm not alone. Enter Matty, a content creator who does deep dives on visual novels on YouTube. His videos go often into the emotions happening during playthroughs and the pain of making some of the decisions. Trying to find the desired path, trying to make the best choices when on the path, trying to read into possible consequences, etc. When you read from a cybertext, you are constantly reminded of inaccessible strategies and paths not taken, voices not heard. Each decision will make some parts of the text more and others less accessible, and you may never know the exact results of your choices. That is, exactly what you missed. This is very different from the ambiguities of a linear text, and inaccessibility, it must be noted, does not imply ambiguity, but rather an absence of possibility, an aporia. There's no, yo Rin, I wanna date ya option. That's because the answer is somewhere else. Matty wants to date Rin, that's his aporia. Eventually, he does figure out how to get on Rin's path, and what happens is an epiphany. Aporia and epiphany are two major tropes of cybertext identified by Aarseth. You encounter an obstacle and you try to overcome it, but the results of your choices are non-obvious. An epiphany is understood as a planned revelation. It's a construct. In case of Katawa Shoujo, we make choices, like the one where Hisao may introduce himself to the class or ask the teacher to do it for him. The consequences will ripple through the game, but the solution is always elsewhere. Act 1 is notorious for this, and I think it's one of its greatest strengths. I wouldn't want Act 1 to be easier on the player by giving more hints. The current setup makes the epiphany much sweeter. In case of Katawa Shoujo, the first major revelation could be on which of the heroines' path do you end up on. In my series of playthroughs, I initially wanted to pursue Emi, but ended up on Shizune's path. I have little complaints, by the way. It's an underrated character with an underrated path. But what if you had a VN that has 0 decision points and reads like a comic book with animations where there's only one ending? Say hello to the kinetic novel. Once things start going, there's only one path leading to only one conclusion. All you have to do is keep pressing spacebar or keep clicking and you'll reach the end. So, is this cybertext? What is this? After giving it some thought, I have to say that I'd call it a hypertext. That's because I can't see the non-trivial effort of finding your way in a labyrinth. Where's the aporia? Where's the epiphany? There's no figuring stuff out. We have what I could call a feedback loop, clicking and getting somewhere. But it's not a labyrinth. A kinetic VN such as Ripple's seems to be a complete outlier here, a hypertext with one chain of events. This brings us to yet another thing that seems to cause issues and misunderstandings. As hinted before, is the problem of gameness. As we can now see, this discussion is much more nuanced than just you shoot shit equals game. Let's try to answer the question that, in a way, brought us here. How much game is there in KS? Is there any? Granted, questions like this were usually asked by people comparing KS to things like Call of Duty. The how much gameness does a game need to be gamey question crops up every time something like KS reaches mass awareness. This is a topic in of its own, one I'd like to cover fully sometime later. But for now, let's stick to what we already have, cybertext. So, how is something like KS similar to, let's say, Doom? Aarseth has, to some extent, solved this problem for us. He separates 3 layers that a cybertext has: the description, the narration, and the ergodic layer. So, let's take Doom as our first example. Doom has a noticeable but clear and well-refined description layer. The HUD shows us a bunch of useful information, such as health, ammo, the available weapons, and such. It describes us those elements. What about narration? Here we go, narration. Even a game so well known for its gameplay has some of it. And the rest is happy demon slaying. A lot of ergodic, for which the game is famous. Let's quickly do the same breakdown for our VN. The description is also available in KS. It's much more subtle than in Doom, because KS has much less data to present to the player. We don't have to track items, so we need no inventory. There are no health points, no armor, no power-ups. The main and perhaps only weapon that Hisao has are his wits, so we don't have to track ammo as well. What we do have is the option to move forward with our text and to review past snippets. The interface or description is, as you can see, slim relative to Doom's. In KS, however, we have loads of narrative. Most of your time you'll spend reading this slice of life story. That's the nature of this beast. The slimmest layer is the ergodic one, the one we would call gameplay, much to the dismay of many who never played any visual novels. And this is how the games compare. The proportions are not to any scale and were not quantified. They merely serve as a rough illustration highlighting the differences. It's a model that's meant to help us get a different spin on the how gamey is a game question. There's yet another thing in Aarseth's book that can help us better understand KS and games like it. Each path had a dedicated writer. Anonymous22 wrote Shizune's, the Hivemind wrote Emmy's, Corporal Crud wrote Hanako's, Suruko wrote Lily's, and Aura wrote Rin's. The heroines not only have their dedicated plotlines, they also appear in each other's paths, along with a bunch of secondary characters who may be shared between some or all paths. When scripting the individual stories, the writers were mostly left to their own devices. I assume the most consolidation work they had to do with Act 1, where there's the most overlap happening. This creates an interesting situation. Who wrote what and where? And does it even matter? Is Emmy the Emmyist in her own path? And how much Emmy is Emmy in, say, Rin's path? This exemplifies what Aarseth calls the Intrigant, an entity whose job is similar to the one of a narrator. The Intrigant is not identical to the writer, editor, or programmer. It's neither of them, and in a way, all of them. The Intrigant is, one might say, a bit of a hive mind. If I get asked a question, or even if it just strikes me by accident, I may make a statement about something that is not relevant to the story at all. This will, for all intents and purposes, be canon until someone else on the dev team cares enough to contradict it. But does that matter? In fact, if it mattered, would it not be in the game narrative in the first place? We could compare the Intrigant to the author in the traditional sense. Its job is to be the mastermind and architect of what Aarseth calls the Intrigue. Should Hisao introduce himself or ask his teacher to do this for him? What are the consequences of those options? This and questions like them make the Intrigue denser and more interesting. Intrigue functions as a space where the Intrigant does its job, sets traps and prepares challenges. I know that this is marketing material that exists externally to the game, but let's read the blurb. Hisao Nakai, a normal boy living a normal life, has his life turned upside down when a congenital heart defect forces him to move to a new school after a long hospitalization. Despite his difficulties, Hisao is able to find friends, and perhaps love, if he plays his cards right. If he plays his cards right. If the Intrigant wanted, it would say something like this. It's taunting Hisao. Be smart, kid, and you may end up in a happy place. But not so fast. I'll make sure that Kenji descends upon you at random moments to make your life miserable. Want some pretzels, boy? Intrigue is a scheme that the Intrigant has prepared against someone very specific. The Intriguee. That would be our character, in this case, Hisao. The way the intrigue presents itself, or rather is presented by the Intrigant, does not make Hisao's life easy. Some choices have severe consequences, others are more like set dressing, and seeing the difference is really difficult. What's worse, and that goes really well in line with the spirit of Cybertext, the consequences are nearly always somewhere else. Dialogues in the Intrigue may help unravel the mysteries and make a sound judgment when at a decision point. Or maybe they're just banter. Keep in mind that we, the players, are not the Intriguee. The user assumes the role of the main character and, therefore, will not come to see this person as an other or as a person at all, but rather as a remote-controlled extension of herself. Unlike Hisao, we are not fully engrossed by the intrigue, and we can detach ourselves from Hisao's perspective. Sometimes, even we must. The institution of the Intrigue also could be another way to explain what Matty calls main character visual novel syndrome. It's difficult sometimes to know what a choice means, since you're not living in the main character's head. You don't have the same understanding as when talking with someone IRL. You're at the mercy of Hisao, the middleman. In those cases, the character does what we would not in the same situation. Going back to the original issue of some people mentioning that the paths are different, maybe too different for their own good, is their perspective wrong? I'm not gonna say that, but what I'm trying to do is to give a different perspective on the same problem. Games are usually made by groups of people with varying styles and skill sets, and achieving consistency is one of the biggest challenges. An alternate take would be to say that the intrigue is varied because the Intrigant prepared it differently between the paths and relative to Act 1. However you want to call it, I don't mind this variance. To me, this is one of the greatest strengths. Unique vocabulary, structure, themes, traits, and characters. There is no master template. Comparing the paths is like comparing apples to oranges. Yes, there are similarities, but there are too many differences to ignore. Let us return to the beginning, the A sticky.
Z8InVision3.com. Guys, let's bring the discussion here. Helps a lot since it looks like Anon is serious in doing this.
One thing that starts to appear is someone, presumably the same Anon, calling out others to take part in development outside of 4chan. This is, in my opinion, one of the first pivotal moments of the game's development.
No Anon posting? What the fuck gives? The OP pick was passed around 4chan a lot. People like the idea of a Cripple-themed age game, and the characters and ideas presented in the OP pick. Sadly, no such thing exists, and the OP pick is just a cock tease. So it looks like A is going to make it possible.
Without a singular, centralized point of discussion, at least initially, the project would dissolve, like all other attempts. Creating an external place to congregate and work that had no affiliation with A or B not only allowed to have a different work atmosphere, but a different culture in general. It allowed to set the tone, and how critical this was to the game's success, we've already partially seen and will explore later.
Translation: once you fuck up and act like an idiot, everyone knows you're an idiot. Anonymity gives you a chance to be a jackass and get away with it. Important postscript, which is great for an image board full of lols, not so great if you want to get work done. While I like the idea of Anonymous, I don't see how something like this can be made without identities. Unless one person did the whole thing.
They link to a small essay that discusses this very issue. In the section titled Anonymity Counters Vanity, we read: As Hiroyuki, the administrator of Nichanuru, writes, if there is a user ID attached to a user, a discussion tends to become a criticizing game. On the other hand, under the anonymous system, even though your opinion/information is criticized, you don't know with whom to be upset. Also, with a user ID, those who participate in the site for a long time tend to have authority, and it becomes difficult for a user to disagree with them. Under a perfectly anonymous system, you can say, it's boring, if it is actually boring. All information is treated equally, only an accurate argument will work. I have to agree with the Anons. An account or a name gathers credibility, or the lack of it. With Anon posting, you can judge only one thing: the merits of the post. While 4chan's Anon system seems to be working well for meritocracy, it has its downsides. Anyone can spam anything. This also creates zero accountability. You can argue that when you register on a forum, you're also not accountable for anything. You can just quit the project after a year or so, but I'm gonna disagree. By creating a screen name, you're creating some subconscious pressure which may tip the scales for people who otherwise would be too much on the fence about work. You can no longer post lol, food job and then pooper, and 2 minutes later post something constructive. A forum also gives structure. By giving threads and subforums, a board such as PHPBB allows to segment work in a meaningful way. The atmosphere is very different and more constructive.
I propose this thread remains stickied, but becomes locked with a final post reminding people to post ideas and discussions in the forum. Okay, thanks, bye. This game is gonna suck, and here's why. I suggested adding Amputee-chan as a secret character and was accused of trolling. If the people involved suck that much ass, the whole game is gonna suck ass. Bitter Anonymous is bitter. Damn bitter, especially when Lost Memory Girl is considered a good idea. How does that fit in a game about physically disabled girls? Actually, I think that idea got voted down. Oh well, this belongs in the forum. This belongs in the forum. No, it doesn't, and here's why. The mods lock and delete threads they don't like. Anonymous high at forums though. That's why some of us are at 4chan. And that's why people keep posting in this thread despite constantly being told to post in the forum. Exactly.
Welcome to Envision. I shall be your guide. It's January 2007, and who wanted to cross over did so. Who wanted to stay in 4chan stayed and remained blended with the other Anons. Development is ongoing. Several people submit their applications to become writers. Every heroine receives her own subforum, same for the protagonist. Many things we take now for granted start on that free forum. Things such as character traits, mannerisms, personal backgrounds are discussed, and of course, names. Up to this point, placeholder names are being used. This is the time some final decisions are made on some proper names. Shizune at some point is almost called Rosa, because she may be a bit thorny? Brilliant? ? Another thing that is discussed and at least partially researched are the disabilities. For example, discussions on how dialogue for Shizune would be presented and how to accurately portray Japanese Sign Language and how it differs from American Sign Language. This is yet another example of why you should always use references and do your research. Not only that, one thing that really caught my eye was this thread listing clichés to avoid. But because this is the internet and anyone can post anything, for the better or worse, we see some less than stellar ideas. Bad End features the removing of the player's eyes, that's still from A, and summoning Cthulhu for Tentacle H scene.
Hyper-prawn version only.
The genuine creepy moe approach with a pinch of Osaka to fight the cliché? I'm pretty sure it's still alright to consider this thoroughly before we get to the next development stage. It's worth mentioning that none of the devs have dignified this short thread with any responses. I think you can guess why. In April, however, after some drama related to ideas on how the project should be handled, the so-called core group passes the mantle to Corporal Crud and yet another individual. Then they proceed to jump off a cliff. Most interest dissolves along with motivation from flaky individuals. Crud decides to move development to a new forum, Donmaku. Some internal shuffling happens and work resumes. The hive mind would later recount that there was tension between people who wanted to make a tasteful VN and people who wanted a product saturated with in-jokes and memes. Setting up shop in a separate place where the team has full administrative powers and creative freedom is, in my opinion, the second greatly important moment in the development. Oh, and speaking of importance, those names are starting to look familiar, aren't they? Eventually, the newly consolidated team, now calling themselves 4 Leaf Studios, moves for the last time to KS Renai US, where the forum stands to this day. It's there where in a dedicated subsection, the dev team starts to post development updates. Those are soon replaced with developer diaries, spearheaded by one individual in particular, Aura. Eventually, he moves the diaries to a separate place, the KS Development blog, which becomes a treasure trove of information about the game and the amateur studio. The blog runs for years and covers many topics related to the game's development. Most of the posts are by Aura, but other teammates such as A22, The Hivemind, Crud, Delta, Nicole Armafi, and Silent Cook also chip in. It's impossible to discuss everything that was mentioned on the blog, but there are a few highlights worth noting. The very process of writing is often the topic of reflection. Reading thousands of words, rereading them, rereading them, analyzing. Structures, thematic elements, plot arcs, subplots, character development, pacing, dialogue, rhythm, flowcharts, exposition, expression, narrative style, branching, fluff, filler, transitions, deconstruction, discussions, despair. Demons everywhere, outright paranoia in the back of our heads. I mean, one of the writers is somewhat frequently getting paranoid/neurotic panic attacks about his heroine possibly not being likable enough. What if they hate her? What if they hate her? If one of the editors makes a fact check and comes telling me they don't sell raspberry flavored popsicles in Japan, I swear I am going to come to your houses at night and stab you. Oh, about those popsicles, I asked a friend who was traveling to Japan to buy one and bring back the wrapper. Our writer didn't follow through with his threat yet, so I guess I'm in the clear for now. The two primary challenges with our work is the gigantic scope of our project and managing the large amount of people working on it. I think we all freely admit that we are basically completely unqualified to handle something this big. They acknowledge what I alluded to, in a way, earlier, that from Act 2 onwards we effectively get 5 versions of Hisao. Different intrigues seem to demand different intriguees. This, and each writer had their own take on the main character. Every line of the game's script needs to be visualized, so it's up to the director to figure out the specific solution. The director can either bypass the issue, leaving the kiss to the reader's imagination, lame, or he could try to manipulate the existing art resources to create a passable representation of a kiss, uncanny. Request a piece of art of the kiss drawn by the artists, expensive, or ask the writer to consider whether the kiss is really needed, problematic. None of you will ever read the real story I've imagined of Rin of Hisao and all of the things that happened between them, just the crude translation that I was able to vomit out on my keyboard. I feel a little saddened by this realization. Here we have to touch upon something truly special. Despite most of the development on the game being discussed via internal channels accessible only to 4LS, a lot was done in the open. This didn't stop only on forum discussions and developer diaries. 4LS went as far as making a separate, miniature visual novel. Titled The Answer, this game discusses the process of making a visual novel, and the title references another game that did a similar thing, called The Question. The Question can be completed in literally 5 minutes. It centers around a protagonist who's working on a visual novel but can't do art, so he pops the eponymous question to his friend. After playing this game, I had to order new glasses, and new eyeballs for that matter. Although, as stated by VNDB, the 2014 Android port, yes, this thing has been ported to mobile, has updated assets. So we're dealing with a product that's meta in relation to something that's already pretty meta. And it has a pretty direct jab at the question, well deserved I'd say. Those new eyeballs were not cheap. The answer is not only a much better looker, but also has more dialogue, more choices, and unlike the question, which merely glossed over VNs, here we're given a distilled rundown about the challenges of making such games. It lays down some ground rules about producing a VN and discusses the genre/medium and its potential. The many observations and thoughts about developing KS crystallize in this one short piece. It touches upon so many things: graphics, writing, coding, sound, testing, critical thinking, and being humble, being ready to learn. The answer has value even if you don't plan on making a VN, but pretty much any or most types of content. As you can see, this miniature VN is much more than just a distraction that a group of devs decided to slap together to keep themselves more on the sane side. And they need all the mental power they can spare since development is taking lots of resources. 2 important decisions are made early in the game's production cycle. 1, there will be no voice acting, and 2, the backgrounds will have to be retouched photos. Both are results of the team understanding scope and seeing their limited steam power. Some things just have to be sacrificed, even if it's really painful, like in case of the custom-made backgrounds. The engine used, RenPy, doesn't have all the features the team needs, so the lead coder, Delta, develops them. Every time you see an item overlaid on top of the current scene, that's a special type of CG animation that had to be implemented. The initial pan across the class is using a custom-coded ease-in, ease-out function. The game also has a tweaked save system. At this point, let's revisit the whole 4chan made a video game thing. If you ever hear that nonsense, now you have even more information to deflect that. 4chan may have been great for brainstorming ideas, but the game had to be made outside of it. An anonymous image board simply lacks the structure needed to make such a product. A development pipeline has to be managed. Being geographically dispersed and not knowing each other face to face is one thing, but being a faceless collective where you're never sure if 2 messages were sent by the same person is just too much. with this semi-anarchic structure, 4-Leaf Studios had apparently managed to strike a balance between the utter chaos of an anonymous image board, where there are too many voices, and a greedy, soulless corporation where no voices matter except those from the very top. This way of working carried them over the 5 years of development. But not only this. The feeling of community and companionship was paramount to getting this thing done. Code is stored in a centralized repository and tasks managed in a bug tracker. The day-to-day talks happen over IRC and a sectioned off portion of the forum. There's an entire post that's dedicated to describing how one day of development of the game looks like, and it's an interesting read. 11:58 AM, forum. Suriko makes a thread about the Oekaki application. 0:23 PM, IRC. Suriko finishes installing the Oekaki application. A22 asks why on earth we got one. 0:32 PM, forum. Suriko makes a public thread about the Oekaki application. 2:32 PM, IRC. I log in and ask why on earth we got an Oekaki application now. And then there's this lovely flowchart, which I find particularly useful. Development marches on. Until... The Internet, January the 4th, 2012. 4-Leaf Studios is proud to present the full release of Katawa Shoujo, free of charge. It's been 5 long years until this day, with a multinational group of 21 developers working on art, music, writing, programming, and direction, to say nothing of the innumerable contributors to the project both past and present. But it's finally here. In early 2012, the game is finished. The sheer amount of download requests forces the web host to throttle the connection. So many people are in fact downloading the game that the seed makes its way to the top 20 of the Pirate Bay. Yarr! With such popularity, KS sends shockwaves reaching far beyond the game's little market niche. It gets picked up by reviewers and, oh boy, there's a lot to talk about. It takes a special kind of indie developer to look at that illustration and think, yes, we are making that game. The developer who gelled around this idea is called 4-Leaf Studios. The game is called Katawa Shoujo. In her review, Amanda Lange from Tap Repeatedly gives the game a fair shot by describing its strong and weak points. She also goes a bit into the game's origin. The review discusses also the issue of tone. Since most video games are about people with superpowers, disability is often used in games only as an excuse for bigger superpowers. The characters in Katawa Shoujo are instead regular people living with disabilities in real-world ways. Falling in love with one of the young ladies isn't falling in love with her disability, but falling in love with her as a person. She also mentions that, in true anime fashion, the weakest character is the protagonist. It's a well-balanced review that points out reasons why the game may or may not be for you. No score is given. Next up is John Carter from Fandom Post. As for art, he points out the inconsistencies, but gives general praise. He mentions how the erotic scenes in general make sense despite some of them feeling shoehorned. He elaborates that the writing quality does vary from route to route though, and I did feel that a lot more effort went into some routes compared to others. The varying quality does feed through to the amount of enjoyment that you will get out of a given route. This time we get to see a grade, B+. Tap Repeatedly and Fandom Post are not as big however as our next media outlet. We are circling back to Kotaku, but not to the main site, its Australian sister. In Ben Lattimore's reader review, we read, each of the main heroines is completely different. Each of them has their own personality with unique traits and differences. Each storyline reveals something new about the characters and there is never a shortage of plot twists. He does point out, however, that compared to other VNs he played, KS has less choices. No score is given, but he recommends the game. Just like Kotaku, Rock Paper Shotgun is a media outlet that does not need much introduction. Getting their spotlight is a bit of a deal. It's a visual novel, a format with which I'm not overly familiar. But heck, I like a novel and I like pictures, so let's see where this takes me. This is not a review. It's an account of my experience of playing the game / reading the novel. He praises the sprites and that, unlike most titles, the game discusses disabilities. He does, however, have a few slip-ups. The interplay between the excitable Misha and the mute Shizune are pointlessly confusing, one invisibly signing to the other, both voices coming from Misha, but with the game seeming to make no effort to clarify any of it. The game doesn't spell this out because we're supposed to be left wondering how much of that is Shizune speaking and how much is Misha applying her filters, consciously or subconsciously. He discusses at length how there's not enough interaction in the game. It's a visual novel, that's the justification, but it's also half pretending to almost be a game, and I can judge it for that. And I can judge it as a visual novel. I cannot imagine the comic version of this. I am split here. A part of me wants to say, yes, kind sir, the game does contain bloat that should have been edited out. Even I, with my patience, managed to get turned off by this a few times. And another wants to dismiss the whole thing as a game journalist going full game journalist. The healthy middle ground seems to be, I agree mostly with what he's trying to say, but I disagree with how he's saying it. Clicking on any more of this sophomoric teen romance is going to make me slit my throat with the sharp end of my keyboard. Sentences like the above, combined with the fact that he had no prior exposure to the genre, make the whole piece come across as dickish whining. As we move forward, please put on your anti-dumb hard hats. You'll need them again. Yes, we're diving into the comments section. Oh, I haven't mentioned, have I? This is a dating sim. I will say though, this line right here, oh, I haven't mentioned, have I? This is a dating sim, is probably where all this shit is coming from. It's not a dating sim. Echoing what Kamen Rider wrote, there are no mechanics that would make it a sim game. There are no points being tracked. The only way to advance within the heroines is to advance within the narrative. Screw-ups like the above really don't help Walker's case, even if I agree with some points. I find it ironic that an opinion piece bashing something for poor writing is in dire need of some editing itself. Or, in other words, spontaneous writing tends to spontaneously catch fire. It's not a dating sim just because John says so you're going to blindly follow him. It's about the story and discovering feels you never felt before. The main objective isn't to fuck crippled girls. You didn't even read it? How can you review something if you didn't even properly play through it? Yeah, men no like red ding. Red ding for losers. This is how professional critics deal with factual criticism. It's one thing to dislike something because it has flaws. It's another thing to express that dislike in a strong way. But going into the comment section and antagonizing people is just unprofessional. When your opinion piece is colored by emotions that look like this, don't be surprised that your comment section looks like this. Only after that he comes to his senses and delivers a proper response. I think the piece is pretty explicit about what happened as I played, since I wrote throughout. It was incredibly tedious, and when conversations were looping gibberish of no interest, I would click very fast, taking in the flashes of text and keeping up without wanting to twist my mouse cord into a noose. I have not flagged this as a review because I've only played a fifth, and because I did skim read a chunk of it. Instead, as is abundantly obvious, it's an account of my experience with the game. It worries me deeply that people think not wanting to read through this massively overwritten sophomoric dirge means someone does not enjoy reading. It's precisely because I do enjoy well-written stories that this one frustrated me so much. Just to be clear, I'm not making excuses for fanboys lashing out. As for the rest of the comments, we get a bunch of the same misconceptions mentioned before, like losing the difference between adventure games and VN's proper in translation, attributing the game to 4chan, etc. People fighting over taste and the definitions of game and good literature. There's one comment, buried deep down, that has a vastly different perspective. From the controversy that I read here, most of the clash of opinions was happened due to a huge gap between Western and Eastern culture, entertainment and media. Slice of life isn't a genre for everyone, especially with Western. Westerners are used to actions and fast-moving plot, while Easterners are used to a slice of life and slow-paced story. It's not only for the game, it's for almost everything. Also worth mentioning, remember how the Intrigant manipulates and hides consequences far away from decisions? Imperceptibly, and I really don't have any idea what it was that caused it to happen, something I did, at some point, caused this story to head in a particular direction. Because the guy just kissed one of the girls, one of 5 it's apparently possible to get into a relationship with. Although this player was not invested, so the whole Aporia Epiphany tension gets dropped on the floor. Comment sections are prone to being dumpsters, ready to catch fire. But strong emotional language like the one featured is only adding fuel to the flame, which is why, despite me not condoning some of those commenters, I believe that Walker is partially to blame here. Many readers were under the impression that he rejected the game on the grounds of it being a VN, and not because, according to him, the writing was poor. Really shitty article. The author doesn't understand the medium. I feel that the author was very biased going into this and did not give it a proper chance. It took me a few times to read into it, and now I understand why so many people reached the conclusion that Walker is biased against reading or VNs. I was one of them. Walker's inexperience with the genre, attacking the slice-of-life aspects of the game, and his emotional language aren't helping. He should have taken more time to reflect and word all of it better, so he wouldn't have to spend said time in the comments clarifying what he meant. And I, perhaps, should have read this with more comprehension. I agree that the complaints seem to be aimed at the VN genre on the whole, and on that note, I'd be quite curious to know whether John has read any other VNs. Compared to many other VNs, I'd say Katawa Shoujo is rather lacking in interaction, which is a bit of a shame really, as I think the success of a VN is very fundamentally based on the user's story interactions. I suppose this is the telltale sign of production cost minimization for a freeware project. We end this tournée on the same person who, kind of, started this mess. Lee Alexander reviews the game and I really enjoy her piece. Not because it praises the game. On the contrary, she bashes KS even harder than Walker did. But even though I don't agree with all points, the way they're presented is flawless. She starts us off by describing the basic gist of what one can expect when playing a VN and recaps the basic premise of Katawa Shoujo. Then she shifts the critique, starting with the erotic portions. Because there's certainly nothing erotic about it. There isn't a lot of sex, and what there is induces hard cringe. The descriptions are too mechanical to be emotionally intimate, and too focused on function to be arousing to anyone. The developers have alluded on the blog to the fact that, since the game doesn't have to sell, they don't have to pander to the base. I don't know. Katawa Shoujo doesn't know what it wants to be either. Perhaps that's the product of being made by a collective, but it's a fatal problem. I've been playing the thing for weeks, and I've played a million games like it, and I still can't tell who it's for. Lack of focus isn't the biggest criticism though, it's the writing. And it pains me to say this, it kills me to say this. I wanted to be the one who would show up and defend this fascinating project that so many people spend years of their lives on. Explaining that detractors just aren't the target audience, don't get the genre, but I can't. But this just isn't good reading, they aren't useful details, the prose is concrete-legged, it defies engrossment. She ends by encapsulating what I see as one of the reasons why it's so difficult to just ignore the game. The internet made, lovingly, a game about romance with disabled girls. That's so weird. That's so wonderful. To sum up our little adventure with gaming journalists, some have liked it, some have disliked it, and some knew what they were doing. It's important to note, players and critics have different agendas and motivations. Critics want to pick the game apart, while regulars just want to play the damn thing. The reviewers, for the better or worse, were not the only ones to receive it. On 20th of September 2011, a thread is started on the KS forums, simply titled, "Thank you, I mean it." It reads, "Hello everyone, I've been a long-time lurker, first-time poster. I've recently come back home from the military on a medical discharge. I'm deaf in one ear and have extremely limited feeling in both hands. I've been depressed and it's been hard coping with these disabilities, but I have this VN. A few people chime in and the thread stays dormant until the launch gets close. Among the replies we see, I read this. People taking our work in and being truly affected. It is something we never really expected, but it makes everything feel just that much more worthwhile and wonderful. Some time passes, and when the game finally drops, an influx of activity happens, so much so that on January 16th, one of the developers and forum moderators, Silent Cook, steps in and consolidates the budding bunch of threads into one. In a probably futile attempt to tidy up the forums a little, I made this thread to hold all the posts of thanks, well-wishing, and similar sentiments from all of you. Thanks. This marks the birth of the Thank You for a Less thread, which grows to eventually span 42 pages written over 8 years, with the bulk of the posts created in the months following the premiere and gradually tapering off as time progresses. And a deep dive into this thread is well deserved, necessary even. We can read opinions from both novice and experienced players. You guys actually did things right! I've played over 25 visual novels, and already it is clear that KS has left a bigger impression on me than any other game I've ever played. Thank you! I spent my evening playing through one of the storylines. What a great accomplishment seeing this project to completion. This was my first visual novel, and it was definitely a great introduction to the genre. For a person who has been off visual novels for a good number of years, I'd like to congratulate the staff for this wonderful and thoughtful game. As someone that has played a great many visual novels, all the way from Ever 17 to YMK, I can honestly say that I have never been as touched, both emotionally and mentally, by one as I was with KS. For a group of amateurs, you put a lot of the professionals to shame. The demo is out at this point for years, but for the first time, access to the entire game is possible, including the erotic scenes. High schoolers have sex. To omit that truth from a story about high school romance would severely lessen how genuine the romances are, and it would insult your devoted fanbase to assume that we're just reading this for some unique sex scenes. This wasn't just some weird hentai, pretend you're the main character you lonely nerd game like I was expecting. Not even close. This was a story, and a great one. And I'm sure someone else has probably already said it, but the age scenes with Hanako are beautiful and deep, rather than just a typical fap scene, and I think that it gives it all the more justice it deserves. I was wrong. Everything explicit was woven into the story in a way that felt necessary. The thread is, however, dominated by accounts from people who felt a truly special connection with the game, and for highly personal reasons that tie into the game's subject matter. Thank you again for creating this game, and anyone who says that it is just exploiting simply doesn't understand or has dismissed the idea that people with disabilities are still people who need love and affection as well, just like anyone else. We don't want to be ignored and forgotten. Give us a chance to be part of your lives. Let us love and care for you. I just want to thank the creators of Katawa Shoujo not only for creating the game or finishing it, but for doing research on what exactly people with an arrhythmia have to go through. I have grown up my entire life living with a rare heart problem known as IHSS, and due to this, I have developed an arrhythmia, and much like Hisao does in the game, I not only have to take medication to keep my heart at bay, but I also have to be aware of what I do and how often I do things. My wife is severely handicapped, essentially paralyzed, unable to speak or move. Her mind is intact, but it's hard to communicate with her, and even more difficult lately to connect to her on a personal level. I played this in hopes that I might find some common ground with the protagonist, and ways that I myself might cope with a loved one with severe disabilities. I had no idea how profoundly this would affect me. Following the stories brought out real emotions in me that hadn't been used in years due to the disability. In short, this is work that all the developers should be proud of. It is making a real difference in my life, and likely hundreds of other lives of people who deal with real people who have disabilities. Thank you so much. Yuki. If your game is making people register specifically on your forum just to give praise, you know you did great. And this is not the only instance of that happening. Many of the posts go into the feeling of marginalization and isolation. However, after my illness, I never had a chance to have a girlfriend. Why? Well, usually, at some point, when I told the girl that I have some health problems, everything ended. Always. I just want to say thank you to devs for restoring my hope in finding someone. I just want to say a massive thank you to the developers for producing an excellent VN that dealt with issues sensitively and showing that people like me, who are differently abled than most, can lead normal, healthy lives and fall in love the same way as anyone else. Thank you. Thank you for letting me admit that I am disabled. Thank you for letting me admit that even though I am disabled, I can be a person and not a disease. Not all of the posts are written by people dealing with various forms of disabilities, but still, many, if not most of them, tend to sit on the heavier side of things. This game has given me a new perspective on life. I mean, seriously, I do date a blind girl now after playing through Lily's ending. I must also say that everything about KS, especially the writing, really moved me. I've never been a big fan of romance stories, but after completing Emmy's route and relating to it, I think that my attitude on my relationships with others has changed for the better. Then I played some more, and eventually got a good ending. And I'll be honest with you, as that final scene took place, emotions bulked up inside of me. I felt my eyes watering and I cried. Manly tears. It made me realize that while longing for a love so deep and powerful, I have never once truly loved anyone, not even in the smallest of ways. I feel ashamed of that fact, and I hope that what this amazing game helped me to come to realize will help me forge a better future. It's vital that we avoid discarding all of that right away, just because it may seem melodramatic or a case of overreacting. Those opinions, even though they're biased and often colored by quite strong emotions, are still perfectly valid. They're exactly that, opinions. They allow us to look into something that was, perhaps, previously inaccessible. And most importantly to me, it is an exceptionally good-natured game. It's written in defiance of the cynicism that too often infects gaming and gamers alike. By playing Hisao as I would play myself, I realized how unfairly I treated people, particularly the women in my life. So, thank you, KS devs. I don't know how long it would have taken me to realize this without you. This game made me decide to keep going when I was becoming increasingly certain that I didn't have a reason to do so. I was planning on not making it to the new year, but now things don't look so bad. But Katawa Shoujo has also put me in the mood of becoming a better person. Being a good person is just the way everyone should be, being more aware and understanding about others. The game isn't a magic cure-all, but it does seem to really help people. It didn't change my life, but I did get a bit dewy-eyed here and there. It's by far and away the best VN I've experienced. It's emotionally deep and nuanced, and I'm glad I found it. It didn't change my life, true, but it has been one of the most emotional works of fiction I have ever had the pleasure of having. You have created a wonderful thing. Be proud of it. You have made the world a slightly better place. I went through the entire 42 pages of sometimes heavy and uncomfortably personal commentary. I've seen walls of text so huge they could actually protect you from invaders. And not even once an amputee complained that there was gravel on the roof, because this isn't what the damn game is about. The thank you thread isn't the only one that attracted major attention. Because I'm trying to respect my own sanity, venturing forth into the Ask Mega thread is an exercise we won't be doing. But in a different thread titled What if Katawa Shoujo never existed, we read, I hope I do not come off as a troll or being rude, or both. After reading through the forum and all the emotional and positive reactions people have gotten out of this game, I am left wondering, why not me? Probably because you are content with your life as it is. The emotional reactions people get out of this game can only happen when something from the story hits very close to home. Let us end this part with the following tidbit from one of the user's signatures. After playing Lily's route, I started eating pizza with a knife and a fork. I am such a gentleman. The animations are not super fancy. There's no voice acting, the backgrounds are retouched photos. Text cannot be mistaken for real people, and music is not enough on its own to tell the story. The final result, however, is something memorable, unique, and touching. Even if not hitting hard for everyone. I would just leave the game running and listen to the moment of decision in a loop for much longer than I'd like to admit. To be there and then, just a while longer. Let's quickly get back to a previous citation from Aarseth. Trying to know a cybertext is an investment of personal improvisation that can result in either intimacy or failure. His choice of words may be a bit striking, but after going through so much material, comments, forum posts, and blog entries, I cannot overstate how spot on this is. Even if KS is not what Aarseth had in mind specifically. The word intimacy describes accurately the entire experience, and actually has the least to do with the H scenes. Knowing those characters, their struggles, hopes, and dreams is intimate in itself. But then, because this is a cybertext, all of that rings even more true. You're afraid of fucking up the situation for Hisao, who's your stand-in that world. After so many touching stories, to say that the game has a bit of a fandom is kind of obvious. It in fact started forming way back when the game was still in development and got greatly accelerated by the release of the Act 1 demo. Then we made a fatal mistake. We released a demo. Suddenly everyone was wondering who those people were. There were many speculations, some of them right, some of them wrong, all of them baffling to us. Why did people even care? People did care, and a lot too. And what do fans do when they care? They make fan art. Fan art, in fact, started to appear at least as early as May 2007, perhaps earlier. In January 2009, 4LS sets up an image repository called Mishimi. This is a play on words between Misha, who we know already, and Shimi, an open source image board system. As years progress, the board grows, and in December 2010, a bot gets added, aptly named Misha Bot. Its responsibility is to cross-post any new content as Twitter posts under the official Misha Bot account. The board is sadly not available anymore, which is a byproduct of the studio's semi-anarchic nature. The Twitter content is still available, and snapshots of the image board have been cached by the Wayback Machine. One of the staples of the KS forums are customized signatures telling other forum users what are your favorite routes and characters, as well as in what order did you complete them. So, in the interest of full transparency, when I played the game originally, nearly a decade ago, I completed Hanako's route, got the good ending, and left satisfied. I couldn't cheat on my waifu. But having now completed the game in 100%, I can say that I missed out. I played in this order. Those are my favorite paths. And those are my favorite characters. Yup, Shizu Army and Rinkin. Sorry, Lily lovers, we just didn't click that much. Once you have your favorite character or characters chosen, you can add small footer images to your forum signature to show your preferences. Still not enough? Replace the game shortcut icon with custom-made hearts that feature snippets of the game art to remind you of something special. More into literature? The Yamaku library has you covered. There you can read fanfiction written by the community and maybe contribute your own to this gigantic stockpile. And since the body is important as well, let me introduce you to the Couch to 5K challenge, where Emi teaches you how to start running and get into shape. When you're done, you can do the Bridge to 10K challenge that will make you do 10-kilometer runs. And there's a separate 100 push-ups challenge that can be done with or without the above. People have their progress mentioned in their signatures, so we know a bunch of them participated. Despite its relatively small size when compared to large franchises, this fandom even has some cosplayers, as seen here in yet another video by VM Passionate Matty. Fan-generated content is not the end of the story, however. It's time to discuss the curious case of Miki Miura. Miki is a side character that's in the same class as Hisao. She's cheeky and confident, but not to the point of being obnoxious. Friendly and maybe a bit imposing. She mostly just leaves Hisao to his own devices. Her short cameo made such a positive impression on the community that there seemed to be a need for more of her. This culminated in the release of Summer's Clover, an unofficial storyline featuring Miki. To be clear, this is not any kind of add-on or expansion, or in any way official. It's just text, with just the same status as other dev fanfics, like Aura's Pedagogy. The reactions were ecstatic. Which is understandable, since there is a bunch of content here. The package contains a main story that branches into two paths, all of which is told from the perspective of Miki herself. I find it really refreshing to have a female protagonist this time around. There's even a piece of soundtrack included, with Miki's theme. This is pretty much the closest we've got to any kind of expansion, mod or DLC. It allowed the fanbase to finally scratch that itch. We've already featured The Answer, a VN that discusses the genre and development of visual novels. As The Answer and this entire story in fact had taught us, making one of those suckers is, as you can see, not easy. Sureko even has this mentioned on his Twitter. NaNoRenO is the challenge of making a visual novel in 1 month. It's like Inktober crossed with a game jam. You have exactly 1 month to write, make assets for, direct, code, test, and release a visual novel. And since writing is among the issues especially beginners deal with, 4LS decided in March of 2009 to prepare something special. Enter William Shakespeare.
Don't drag me into this, mate!
In Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, there's a scene where we witness a play within a play. And it's that deeper level story that 4LS decided to adapt into a self-contained VN titled PXT. Its job is to show people that even if you can't make assets or write a script, you can literally just assemble something out of freely available parts in RenPy, a game engine which itself is free and open source. I admit it's a bit surreal to read Shakespeare's lines spoken by anime characters. Apparently, this is my life now. The Answer and PXT are not the only things that 4LS has published outside of the core game itself. During the game's development, and even after the fact, they made 7 art books and albums. Those were sold during comic markets, and after some time, they were made available for free from the official website. They're really well put together with some great artwork. For Japanese players, there's also the player guide, which has a few illustrations. So even if you don't understand the text, you can at least look at some great art.
I mean, it's one way to get people to patronize the Shanghai, right?
Speaking of Misha, here's my current wallpaper. She's making sure that I finish the video. Okay, Misha, I get the message. You can back off now. I swear, man, one of these days. Then there are official Firefox themes to customize your browser. Because having the student council oversee your work will make you tons more productive. Misha sees you going to Reddit and she's disappointed. And if you still need more, there's the enigmatic Box of Sound, a free-to-download package with the game's soundtrack, also containing 2 extra tracks featured in promotional material. Now you can take this pretty much excellent bit of Katawa Shoujo wherever you go and thus relive all those moments without firing up the game. The amount of content, both official and fan-generated, is impressive. The quality of many of those pieces simply speaks for itself. Not bad for a Cripple porn game. The sun never truly set upon 4-Leaf Studios. Their geographically dispersed team of 21 developers, located in places such as Australia, Europe, and USA, kept working on Katawa Shoujo for 5 solid years. They worked, made jokes, and had quarrels, like any other game development team. But unlike many, they cracked the code of remote work more than a decade ago, and with great success. Even though it hurt them in the guts, they made the hard call to cut custom-drawn backgrounds from the scope and opt for adjusted photos instead. Many developers, amateur and professional alike, trip here by taking on too much work, which is not without significance, since, as 4LS themselves freely admitted, the making of the game took much longer because of their inexperience. They kept themselves motivated through special occasions like Secret Santa, but primarily thanks to the great support of the growing community. Shifting the game from a mess of memes with the made by A fuel to something actually tasteful was a battle well worth it. This whole thing had so many opportunities to implode or dissolve. On some occasions it somewhat did, but the developers kept going. The game got a successful multi-platform release, and all of that with minimal hiccups, which were isolated and got patched out quickly. You don't hear that when discussing modern AAA games, do you? The subsequent language patch releases broadened the audience even more. This audience would go to comic markets and buy official art books, wandering around the same halls as RAITA did more than a decade prior. KS is fascinating in so many ways. From its inception and development, the way it interacts with its genre and tropes, how it managed to build a community despite not having a strictly defined target audience. I wanted you to see how huge this game actually is, not only in terms of content, but also manpower used and the exponential amount of meta surrounding it. References to references, stories once known, forgotten, then rediscovered, multiple communities involved, and the eventual reception, both from journalists and players. Westerners, even well versed in a genre, or generally well knowing a foreign culture, are still outsiders. 4LS were those outsiders looking in and not liking what they were seeing. They decided to do better, and for the most part, it seems that they did succeed. And despite amateurish writing that shines in a bunch of moments, all things considered, I can't allow the defects to take center stage. There's a separation between the letter and the spirit. While KS's letter struggles on more than one occasion, the spirit does not, and many resonated with that spirit. For a bunch of people, this was their first ever exposure to the VN genre, myself included. The game has also gotten some people into making VNs. Case in point, Everlasting Summer, developed by Soviet Games, and has how many Steam reviews? Almost 50k, and they're overwhelmingly positive. Oh, hello there, comrade. Is there perhaps somewhere a shed where you and I can discuss the current challenges of the proletariat? And let's not forget about our VN MVP over here, Matty. He's working on a VN titled Omoneko. Omo? You have a typo there, Matty, and an embarrassing one. There you go. The free demographic is on your side now. That's me thanking you for helping with the script. The long-lasting results of the game I can at least partially attribute to its sincerity, which seems to be the game's secret weapon. It never pretended to be something that it was not, but many had mistaken it for what it wasn't. The final product is a work that's non-cynical and non-pretentious, or, to put it in more positive wording, honest and humble. Sometimes you may see a plot twist coming from afar, or the slice of life conversations may be dragging too much, but I don't regret my time spent with KS. One might say that I got invested. As sappy as it sounds, I may have left a part of my heart at Yamaku. All of this brings us to today. You may argue that the game is great, or a huge flop, both in it portraying people with disabilities, or just in general. But ask yourself, did my favorite game dev studio make a game that includes a marginalized group? Ever? If yes, then when? Or did their games start any kind of conversation touching topics other than games themselves? What about all those people that we mentioned today? Where are the ignorants? Did they learn to judge things for their merits and not appearances? Did the trolls grow up and have stopped setting comment sections ablaze? How's it going between Yuki and his wife? Are they still going strong? Did all those people from the forums change not only for better, but also for long? What about the senior gravel specialist? Did they finally learn to see the bigger picture? Or are they harassing Valve that the bullet physics in Counter-Strike are not 100% accurate? I don't have the answers, but one can't help but ponder at times. And where are, on the other hand, the devs? Anonymous22 has vanished in the depths of the internet. Aura, it seems, mostly keeps to himself and his various hobbies. Cripple Crud is a sci-fi writer who published 2 books in his Zemila Chronicles, Conspiracy and Confederacy. He's also making a VN titled Historia and helping Matty torture himself with Omoneko. The Hive Mind is a fiction writer working on the Vanquisher series, which is currently on hiatus, and he as well is helping out with Omake. Suruko is busy dabbling in multiple VNs, despite them being suffering. Those include Twofold, Twofold First Snow, and Celeste Academy. Artist Gebi seems to be somewhat around. Pretty much so Kamifish, who has been, at least a year ago, working on a video game. Rems still seems to be active, although my Japanese is a bit rusty, and by that I mean it does not exist, so I don't know what all this means. RAITA, sadly, is no longer with us. Climatic, the guy who made the art for Rin's Path, as well as art for The Answer, is busy retweeting Delta's tweets. Speaking of, Delta, one of the directors and the lead coder for KS, seems to be writing the occasional anime reviews. The artist, previously known as Doomfest, is working as a director and principal artist on an anime-inspired character action hack-and-slash that tells the story of a magical girl paramilitary group fighting back against an alien invasion. The title is in early access and has been really well received. Mike Nell, the one responsible for the high-quality full-motion video cutscenes, is doing NANI? Looks like he's doing alright. Renpai Tom, the maker of the Renpai engine, is still active and going strong, providing tools for VN creators worldwide. And what about RAITA, the guy who kicked off this mad adventure in the first place? He's still around. Fantia describes itself as a crowdfunding platform for creators, and RAITA is active there. I don't know how much power do those 18k hearts hold, but seems substantial. Not to mention RAITA's involvement in commercial game development, mainly the Valkyria Chronicles series. As for the future, the game had its last support release in June 2015, with version 1.3.1. Everlasting Summer has been on Steam since 2014, so KS should have no pushback from Valve. Especially since in 2018, Valve changed their content policy, allowing all erotic games to be published on Steam. I'd really like to see KS have a Steam release, a real one, not just that joke they did years ago. But pulling a 10-plus-year-old codebase from the freezer and shoving it on Steam, while also adding all the unofficial language patches that cropped in the meantime, probably won't be a quick job. Not to mention testing across multiple platforms and some bureaucracy that's inherent for this type of a deal. I'm thinking out loud because people want more KS. But KS is not like Age of Empires or GTA, where you have a franchise and run with it. KS is this one singular yet polarizing experience. It teaches that you should never be afraid to create. You may end up inspiring dozens or thousands of people. The sun is setting above Yamaku. The classes, empty, are so peaceful. Everyone left, and that's how it should be. They all had their time. We all had our time. There will be no sequel. The developers were clear about it. This is a world less to expand and create spin-offs, more a world to return to. It's great, just as it is. Katawa Shoujo has a legacy of changing people's lives for the better. And it stands just like its heart beats. Strong.